Good morning, everyone, and a big happy welcome from myself, Amber O'Shea, Head of Strategy from Australian Disability Network. I am very delighted that we are closing the Access and Inclusion Week of Impact 2024 with this final incredible panel of talented people beside me for the insights into inclusive disability representation in media, marketing, and communication. For those in the room, and feel free online as well, let's do a little round of applause, please. As an audio description, I'm still going to say young Caucasian female. I'm going to own that. In very classic Melbourne black. I'm dressed by my mother-in-law. She'd be very happy for the shout out, Lahane in Dublin, in Thurles, Ireland. And today I have the absolute pleasure of starting with an acknowledgement of country and acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which we meet today. And I would love to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. This is my hometown here in Naarm as well, on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, which makes it that little bit more special to have our international guests here on our lands and welcoming to the very classic overcast Melbourne that we have today. A big happy welcome to all of the guests online. I think we have about 100 people online as well also joining us today. The session is recorded for our guests who have been unable to attend because this is such an important topic that we want to be keeping the conversation going. I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping as well. So for those that are in person today, if you would need to use the facilities, you can just go back out to the lifts and down the end, past the double doors on the right, you will find the bathrooms. And just one little bit of housekeeping for the virtual attendees. If you are online and you are not the Auslan interpreters, please have your cameras off. Thank you so much. One other bit of housekeeping for the online individuals is that a reminder, or you've probably already figured it out, that the chat has been disabled. That is because the Q&A function has been enabled. So we're encouraging lots of Q&A today. We've got about 20 minutes for that. So anyone online who has questions, please post it in the Q&A. They'll come to my handy dandy smartphone over here as well to facilitate that session when we get to it. And of course, in the room, let's just put up our hand or make eye contact or make yourself known and we'll get the microphone over to you as well. I am going to begin with a welcome and introduction to our beautiful hosts at EY today. A big thank you so much for hosting us. It is incredible to be here at EY. And I'm going to hand over to Rodney Plitz, Managing Partner in Melbourne, for his own introduction.
Thank you, Amber, and hello, everyone. Welcome to our office on a Friday. It's our pleasure to be hosting today. My name's Rodney Piltz, and I'm the Office's Managing Partner here in Melbourne. Apologies on behalf of David LaRocca, who's our Oceania CEO, who would have been here today. He had to travel back to Sydney last night, unfortunately for personal reasons, but these are events that he loves to be at. But we're all very pleased to be here. I'm described as a middle-aged-ish white man, around 6 foot tall, wearing glasses and follically challenged. That was actually David's description of himself, and when he handed his notes off to me last night, I looked at it and went, it will probably do. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands in which we're meeting here today and pay our respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you for everyone being here in the room and online. It's wonderful to be part of this conversation. EY prides itself on being an inclusive employer, and it's a legacy that actually goes back into our history. For those that don't know, one of the co-founders of this firm, Arthur Young, so his name is Young in Ernst & Young, he started out, he was trained as a courtroom lawyer, but unfortunately he lost much of his eyesight and became deaf. So he had to change careers. Fortunately for us, that led him to shift to realign his skills to what was an emerging profession of accounting, and he founded Arthur Young & Co. in 1909. What was his disability at that time drove him to a lot of innovation and entrepreneurship, and those are sort of traits that really we think are a part of our culture and our DNA here today. So that's a real part of our DNA that we attribute to Arthur Young. We've also had a large inclusive representation program, which we call the Social Equity Uplift Campaign. It was launched in 2022, and it promotes inclusive growth through storytelling. We've got a video series from a range of our people who they provide insights into their unique experiences and demonstrate how valuing differences has made a difference to them individually and to us collectively. And the series is actually really powerful to hear their stories. So that's something that we continue on our journey of inclusion. We look forward to hearing from the speakers here today. It's going to be a great discussion. And once again, thank you to everyone who's joined us online and here today. And thank you to the Australian Disability Network for asking us to host today. And I'll hand back to you now, Amber, to continue on. Thank you.
Amber again. Thank you so much, Rodney, for your warm welcome, and what a beautiful history to be connected to as well, which is such relevant links and ties to our purpose of why we're all gathered here today. I'm going to do some introductions, and I haven't prepared any notes for the panel because I'm just going to speak to my friends, I think, and talk to, actually this could go either way, in introducing the panel of the troublemakers with me. But we are so lucky to have these three speakers sharing their experiences and insights and knowledge with us on this topic. We have a very exciting lineup where Carolyn Casey, founder of Valuable 500, is going to tell us why we're here, how this began, what's going on.
Philosophical.
If you were at our conference yesterday, you would know that Carolyn Casey doesn't really need an introduction. She will probably just ride a horse in here and introduce herself. But we were sans horses this morning. So I will tell you that she is the global change maker who has got 500 CEOs to sign a movement to commit to put disability inclusion on the agenda. We're also joined by my amazing friend, Christine Hemphill, who's come all the way from France, but you'll actually notice with her accent perhaps that she's an Aussie. So she's resided early days in Canberra, but she's back here and joining us on these lands to talk about open inclusion. And we love open inclusion. Open Inclusion is an inclusive research and design organisation founded by Christine Hemphill. We do have the banner up here as well that has in the room a bit more information, but Christine is going to tell you all about what she does. And that's going to be followed by our very own Hayley Brooks, who is our Customer and Employee Experience Lead at the Australian Disability Network, who is going to make that tie as well as to how we're working together. This is all about the lived experience of persons with disability and giving them a voice, and that is exactly what Christine and Hayley do. So in their research, they are on the ground getting feedback to understand what works and what doesn't work, and how to evolve and shape those insights into impact and make the change that we need. And that is the incredibly important work that's going on. So let's start with Carolyn Casey. Give us some energy in the room, please, and kick off, and I'll hand the microphone over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody online. I'm back. So just want to start by doing my own audio description, and I'm not doing the Melbourne Black again. So for those of you who have not heard my voice before, I'm a 52-year-old Irish woman with blonde hair, very round black glasses. I'm like Edna from The Incredibles. And today's outfit is debatable. Is it lime or green or yellow long dress with a black top and a black belt? I just want to start because it is a real joy to see how influence and power extends across the world. And the reason I say that is because we're sitting in the offices of EY. And I really want to say thank you, Rodney, for coming and giving your Friday morning and being here and genuinely being here and present. And we know that David would have wanted to as well. So that's a real thing. So thank you. But for EY is one of the iconic companies of the Valuable 500 and was led by Carmine DeCibio. And I have to be honest, Carmine has been an extraordinary ally and friend. And I just know how much that partnership has meant to us. So it's long and real. And it's not some PR exercise and campaign. I want to make that very clear. EY's commitment from Carmine to Mary Klein to right throughout the business is real. So thank you. Very quickly, for those of you, I'm just going to just kind of amend a little bit at what the Valuable 500 is. Amber is absolutely right. I am the global troublemaker and creator of the Valuable 500. That is true. But what it was done, it was to really end the CEO silence globally on disability. And that was, it is not a criticism per se, but it was a very much needed move. Disability has remained on the edges of the corporate agenda, and it certainly wasn't in the leadership agenda. And it was part of this horrible, divisive competition in the DE&I agenda, where we had this categorization of the human experience, whether it's LGBTQIA or gender or race, now more social mobility, age, and somehow disability just kept falling off the edges. And that is because, honestly, we put it down to many things. Lots of misunderstanding about the value that disability and family members bring to society and to business. Because I think maybe Rosemary said it so very well 2 days ago, we're looking at it as a deficit model, and Breyer would talk about it as a strength-based model is what we need to be looking at. But business leaders wouldn't have seen that disability's got anything to do with them. Like, that's for charities, or that's for the medical stuff, or that's for inspiring human beings. Really? I myself have lived experience. I am registered blind, and that means I'm registered blind with my glasses on. I have half a foot vision. I represent a very unknown number in the business world that 80% of disability is invisible. So I can kind of pass off, if I want to, as not having a disability, which I have done, which is exhausting. But it is something that our business leaders don't know. Our business leaders are also not aware that it is estimated that anything between 12 to 15% of their teams currently have a lived experience of disability, but they are not disclosing it. That has been proven by research. It's not some anecdotal passion. Now I'm going to connect it to something else we know from research. Before we launched the Valuable 500, we realized that 7% of 1,000 CEOs that we researched also had a lived experience of disability. 4 out of 5 of them were not disclosing it. So if a CEO and a leader is not willing to disclose, what does that mean? And that's why we're here about representation. And that's why it was so important the Valuable 500 broke the CEO silence. How we are in the world is controlled by brands. What we see and what we hear informs so much of these feelings and ideas that are brought up and the myths that happen around disability. In the field, certainly over the last 25 years, and I hid my own disability, is because how disability turned up in our world was you either were like, oh my God, that is so sad. That is so hard. It's the worst thing that could ever happen to you, to, oh my God, you're so inspiring, or you're a freak. Because I often say in James Bond, all the criminals had a disability. Let's be honest, think about how disability had turned up. So who controls that? Who controls what we see and what we hear? And where is the disability voice in that control? How do we actually get authentic and real and accessible, normal view of disability? I don't know what normal is, but you know what I mean. A very lived view of it. And what we believe is brands, because let's be honest, these 500 organizations, which are some of the biggest brands in the world with the biggest names in business, which control 23 trillion in market cap. Do you know how much they're spending on advertising and PR? And where do you think that money goes? To the images we see. So one of the things the Valuable 500 is committed to doing is using the might of the collective power of this 500 CEO-led, 22 million powered, huge supply chain, 23 trillion market cap to beat down some of the biggest system barriers. And one of them that we will be working on as we aim to our Accountability Summit in Tokyo 2025 is representation. It's the hot cookie. So There is representation in self-ID in the business, which we cover off around reporting. But this here today is the exciting piece. The exciting piece is you're going to hear more from Christine. And I just want to say the reason that Christine and ADN are working with us on this, despite the fact that Valuable 500 has 7 big, massive research organizations, and they're fabulous. And I'm not here to criticize, because I actually don't believe that's what we're here to do. We're here to choose the opportunity. Is we could not find a big global research agency who could give us the response of the real consumer who we wanted to speak to. So when big research agencies are approached by our brands, they say, please, can you get the voice of disability? They can't get them. So we went to, well, she's obviously also my great friend and troublemaker, but I also know how important it is to get the truth. I have a tattoo on my wrist and it says the truth. We are here to tell the truth, not to hurt anybody, but tell the truth to open up the opportunity. And very lastly, before I say this, because representation, when we speak about it in the corporate world, we'll be asking our 500 companies to improve their communication internally and externally about the representation of people with disability authentically, accurately, and accessibly. Because when you hear what Christina's got to say, we need to do that. So can you imagine what 500 companies will do? But Rodney and all of you Westpac and business leaders, this is not just for you. It is a call out to my family, the disability community. Your voice needs to be heard. Nobody else can speak for us other than ourselves. And research is not only an opportunity to help inform our businesses so they can inform their clients and their consumers for the 13 trillion market that exists, but most importantly, you can also get paid for this work. Your opinion is valuable. So I'm going to now pass on to Christine, is that right? And just to say a huge thank you again. And for those of you online and here on a Friday morning, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Caroline. It is genuinely such an honour to be here. I'm Christine Hemphill, the founder and managing director of Open Inclusion. I have an Australian accent. I come from the Ngunnawal land, so I'm going to take a moment and just say I worked it out this trip. France might be my home now, but this is my country. And I want to really thank the traditional owners and custodians of my land, the Ngunnawal people around Canberra and the region, but also here in the Naarm area in Melbourne. This is a time it feels full circle. I started my career about half a kilometre away here in Melbourne. I have had an interesting career in a range of areas and have landed in the place that I feel at home. And I feel at home in this space of listening to truths, because there's not a truth. There is your truth and your truth and your truth. And actually, this is the joy of being a researcher. We have the privilege of listening to those truths and making meaning from it and taking insights from it that, as we will today, we can share with organisations to help inform better decisions. So at the end of the day, that's what we're here to do. My audio description, I'm a white middle-aged woman at the end of a wonderful, wonderful week here with AusDN's session, so looking a little tired, a little bit of grey to showcase the children and energy that have gone into the past few decades and setting up a business that I am truly proud of, because our job is to really find those truths and help them be heard by those people that need to hear them, want to hear them, and want to do something better as a result of having heard them. So to go to, if we can start the slides, please. I'll share a little bit about, why not? I'll stand up. Right, here we go. Sorry, I'll just turn a little bit so I can see. Thank you. We had the privilege, last year we were talking to the Valuable 500 and they said, we're wanting to understand disability representation and we're wanting to understand it globally. Disability representation is this area that is just so exciting because it's something that we can actually move quite quickly. It can move faster than we can potentially move the built environment where we've got cement to move. It can move faster than we can potentially move design of physical products where there's manufacturing processes that might be putting out millions of widgets a day. This is a space where understanding can make that transition happen faster. There are still practices, though, there are still approaches and ways that we're learning that we need to unlearn in order to do that. So when we started this research of listening across the globe to people with different lived experiences of disability, was really to say, what is it that we need to learn from what people are wanting? What is it we need to learn from how people are experiencing brand communications, advertising and marketing, TV, film, media today, news and current affairs, so that we can start to change these narratives, so that we can be those good troublemakers, those creative renegades that can start to agitate for better ways and more authentic ways of representation. I talk about research actually quite often as being this space that has almost an undue power on design, on innovation, on the way we live, because it's the insights that feed in. Representation is very similar. And one of the things, in fact, I was saying it the other night, I say we've got an inclusion problem in research, therefore we have an exclusion problem in design, in product and service delivery. We have an inclusion problem in disability representation, therefore we have an exclusion problem in the way we have social attitudes, experiences and customer, customer perspective and brand perspective. So if we can go to the next slide. We'll touch today some of the background and research approach that we took on, just how did we do this and who did we do this with? I'm going to share some global perspectives on disability representation. So there's kind of high level, what did we hear from across the world? Then some Australian insights. Australia, interestingly, was an outlier. That is always interesting. I'm not going to try and uncover why. That's not my role. I haven't lived in this country for 14 years, but I am going to share that it is an outlier. And I'd be really interested in the Q&A or in any discussion after this session today to hear your perspectives on why that might be. And then a couple of takeaways. What can this mean to businesses? So to people working across brands or working with brands, whether that's as an NGO, whether that's within a large brand, whether that's for brands or a combination of these. What can we do today, walking out of here, that can proactively start to address this? Next slide, please. And the next one. So the background and the research approach, we had 3 different ways we looked at this. We often use multi-modal research approaches so that we can understand both the what, getting some of that, what's happening across a broad experience and who to, and getting some patterns, enough people to get patterns, so using some quantitative approaches, but also some qualitative, some of those deeper, richer stories that tell us why, what's actually happening in the detail. We also did a literature review, so we started by saying, what's happening across the world, what is already known, so that we spend our energy of primary research in the more unknown spaces. In terms of the survey, we had 1,000 respondents, 15 countries. We had 4 different languages, but I think we had 5 English version languages because English language and actually cultural disability language is very different in South Africa to Kenya, to India, to Australia, to the US or UK. We had a number of Spanish versions because we're in Latin America, German and Japanese as well. We also held focus groups, so having listened to 1,000 people in terms of a structured way with some open questions as well. We then had a whole lot of real curious questions that we wanted to get into. So we ran focus groups in 7 countries, and that included Australia. And the people we engaged in those focus groups, they really were powerhouses of leaders across the disability sector. And, just to be very thankful to my partners here at AusDN, the people that we were able to reach to in Australia were amazing. So everyone in all of our focus groups were both personal and professional leaders in disability inclusion. So they had personal lived experience, but they also worked in disability representation in their day job in some leadership role. Next slide, please. Partners, we could not do this without partners. And Caroline talked about reaching to us as a partner to them, but we had to reach to partners. We're a small but specialist agency. We cannot do this ourselves. Actually, we were also working with Yale University, so we had some wonderful, bright students from Yale working particularly within the literature review. And then we were working with partners across different parts of the globe. So, of course, the Australian Disability Network here in Australia, our friends Moiro in Japan, Enable India in India, Enable, who are running their conference at the moment in Kenya, Shazasin in South Africa, Enable Me in Germany and Switzerland, and actually Austria, so the German-speaking parts of Europe, Include Me across Latin America, and Fable in Canada. So thank you to all of them. We could not have done this without them. The how. What's different between how Open runs research and how research is traditionally run today? Today, as I mentioned, I think there is a problem in research. I think the exclusion footprint that sits within research is critically impacting the way we're living, the way we're creating, and the way we're delivering various services, and actually the way we're understanding how those services, products, and environments are received. We don't know how we're failing large parts of our community because we're not listening to them. We can't listen to them because we're not running accessible and inclusive research in ways that is suited and adapted to people who are human. And humans vary. And humans vary more, as Caroline was talking about, than we necessarily let on or show. And if we're not designing for that variance, we're not designing to listen appropriately. And this is just a legacy problem of the way research is run. And I know a lot of those large research firms, and there are a lot of gorgeous people within them wanting to do better. But our tools, our skills, the way we're educating and teaching people to research is currently not necessarily working for people. This is some of the things we do at Open, and we're, the practices we use to try and address that, to unlearn some of the research practices and move forward into ones that are much more inclusive of a broader range of voices and perspectives. Firstly, it has to be accessible, and this really goes to disability representation, and the first of the insights from that is accessibility. Well, research needs to be accessible too. It needs to be in formats that people can understand, can perceive, can engage with, and can respond to in ways that are working for them. Secondly, it needs to be co-created. In order to be truly accessible, we need to, but also just useful. We need to be listening to different people who have different lived experiences that can say, if you've got this small torch of insight looking at this very large world, I often say, all research is flawed, but some is useful. It's not the territory, it's a map of the territory. We need to know where to spend the energy to put the dots on that map. And actually by co-creating that research with people with lived experience, we can do that. It needed to be localised because just as we need to hear from people with different access needs and different perspectives, we also need to hear from people with different cultural perspectives, different local, regional, jurisdictional understanding. So we needed to work with partners in each of the countries that we're not we don't have team members in, to make sure that it's suitable and appropriate within the local region. It has to be fair. It has to be paid. Caroline was talking about being paid for research. So often do we hear within, social research, yes, but isn't this good for your community? Yeah, it's also good for your business. All other research is paid. Why should social research with a social benefit, not be paid? There will be benefit out of this to the organisation, whether it's the research agency, whether it's the organisation that's paying for it. It needs to be fair. And actually, not only should it be fair in terms of being remunerated, it should be fair in terms of making sure that the people who have spent their very precious time, their very precious energy, operating within a world that's not always designed well for them, so time and energy is incredibly precious. We need to also pay back in saying thank you to people and showcasing where did it go and what did this impact, so that people understand how important this is. I'm going to go a little bit of personal story here and say I spent my Sunday with my sister on the side of Saturday, is my sister, of a power wheelchair competition training in Canberra. And she is a full-time carer now of a gorgeous disabled son who was showcasing his skills in power wheelchair. And she was saying, we're over asked, we're over surveyed, and I never see any progress. I just can't be bothered. I'm the researcher that's asking that moment of just, we really need to pay back and say, it's not just in pay, it's in saying thank you and showcasing change as a result, making sure that our research has the impact it has the potential to have. It needs to be diverse by design, and that's not just different access needs, it's the diversity and the beautiful range of people in disability. So we are not just our disabilities, we are different genders, different ethnicity, different mixes that are unique in us. And actually making sure that when we're looking across disability, we're not just getting to the easy to reach disability, we're getting to people with a different diverse experience of disability across the full breadth and beautiful range of that. And we need to use mixed methodology, as I mentioned, so that we understand why, but we can also have enough data to say, but how do we prioritise this? Next, please. I won't go into this in depth. Anyone who's interested, we will leave this. AusDN has this report. But essentially to say, across the survey, we had the most beautiful breadth. And this was due to our partners. We had quite a deep screener to say we really want to design in breadth across the way we're engaging. 1,000 participants, a little bit over-gendered to female, 54% or 55% female, 42% male, 21% non-binary or other, 17% importantly marginalised ethnicity, so people who identified within their region as having a marginalised ethnicity. Very tricky to ask in 15 countries around ethnicity. There is no right way to ask, so the only way we ask is, do you identify as having an ethnicity that is marginalised within your region? And in terms of across different countries, a third really in Europe, just under a third in North America, 171 across Asia, 122 here in Australia, 70 in Africa, both in East Africa and South Africa, and 50 across Latin America. A wide range of ages, right through to someone who is over 85, so starting at 18 through to over 85. And an incredible breadth of disability. So we required 25% across sensory needs, physical needs, neurodiversity, and chronic health and mental health. But you'll see we actually had 2.7 needs on average per respondent, so a huge amount of co-occurring needs, and therefore just this wonderful breadth of perspectives across different access needs. Next slide, please. So to global perspectives, what you're here to see and hear. Next one, please. There were three big takeaways. So for those who are just kind of a little bit, yes, when are we getting there? Wake up, this is a moment, this slide is useful. The three big takeaways that were delivered by Caroline at the World Economic Forum in January this year. What can you learn about disability representation that is useful and pragmatic to you? Ensure that your representation of disabled people is accessible. There is no point, and we've got some lovely stories here which you are a little perverse and you will laugh. It needs to be accessible. Seems obvious. People with disabilities would like to be able to see those images and hear those stories that you're having about them. Make sure they can. Secondly, representative. We talked about this breadth of disability, but also this extent of disability. This is somewhere between 15 and 25% of any community around the world. So what is the breadth of representation that you have within your brand, within your scope, whether you're just choosing to share something within your team internally or whether you're a global brand and marketing expert? How much are you showcasing people with disabilities? What's the breadth and the diversity of representation? And authentic narratives. This one is just There is so much wrapped in this one because everyone's narrative is authentic to themselves. So there's no disability narrative. There are disability narratives. That feels complex sometimes, and it is complex, but it's very simple when you actually engage with people with disabilities, because all those complex layers that make a person are completely cohesive within that person. So for all that it can feel complex when you kind of go, oh, but disability and then region and age and gender and ethnicity and sexual orientation, oh, my head's exploding. Just ask the person. It's so easy to them. They can describe what's relevant within the experience you're asking about. And that narrative just comes to life with that lived experience. Next one, please. So in terms of the spectrum, we'll talk to each of these just as a spectrum, because there's not a right and wrong. In all these things, there's a spectrum. So the starting of accessibility, there is inaccessible, and in fact, very few organisations are truly inaccessible. You might just by accident be a little bit accessible, in fact, because there's quite a lot of tools out, these days to help you. But inaccessible is people just cannot perceive it, understand it, engage with it, access the message that you've got. No consideration, no specific, consideration as to disability needs in terms of accessing that information. Alternatives, if it's got a visual element, having sound alternatives. If it's got a sound element, having visual alternatives. If it's got an engagement element, thinking about how different people engage with their computers or with the content wherever they are. Helping people know what the message is. Moving up, moderate accessibility, thinking about rules-based accessibility, making sure that if it's digital content, that WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, that you've met with those. It may be inconsistent across a brand experience in that mid layer. Some of it might be great, some of it might not be so good, and it might be limited by channel and by the environments that you're in. On the other side is delightfully inclusive. Actually designing this with a very specific consideration. It's people that write alt text in the same creative voice and the same, using the same energy that they have the actual visual content of an advert, for example, or providing audio description that has been co-designed with people who are using that audio description, and again, using it creatively, not just functionally. So it's about experience. A couple of examples of this. I said we'd have some perverse stories. We'll have a quote for this, but the guide dog ad in South Africa, it wasn't accessible to blind viewers. Yes, you may laugh now. It's a little sad laugh, but it is about us, but not for us. And it very clearly said that, because there was no audio description of this ad, and it didn't even mention in the audio of it who it was for right until the end, because it was a visual first ad. Social media is getting much better in basic accessibility, but a lot of organisations don't know how to use that. A lot of individuals don't. So really thinking about either the channel limitations or the use of that channel limitations is kind of the middle. And we heard a lot about that from the people in the survey and the roundtables. And at the really positive end, and you'll see this in the white paper, Procter & Gamble, their ads, they've already got 60% of their ads are audio described and captioned. Their goal is that 100% of them will be by 2025. That is 1 year away. Now that is exciting. They also align their brand experience to this, and we'll talk to this in a minute. And if you look at their packaging or even just feel their packaging, you'll understand how deeply they've considered their brand experiences end to end, from advert to experience of the product. Next one, please. So a couple of stats to go with this. In terms of the accessibility, desired by all, 92% of our respondents felt that brands are responsible to ensure products and services are equally accessible to all. That's pretty well everyone, because some people will say don't know or didn't answer. So that is pretty well, everyone says this is just critically important to us. And then inaccessibility, that 63% of our respondents had always, often, or sometimes been excluded from being able to get to that content. So this was specifically looking at brand communications and that they could not access that brand communications, and we'll share later on why. Next slide, please. And in terms of, this is the one as to why the main barriers to brand communications was lack of audio described or alt text options to that brand communication, information that comes too fast for me to read or absorb. This is just a reminder, accessibility does not just include sensory needs. Huge amount of neurodivergence, huge amount of people with different linguistic skills, different reading skills. So really think about speed and information. And I might be invited to do something that is not accessible to me. So if you're thinking about engagement, click here, use this QR code, reach to this, go to that. It's not always accessible to people. There's a range of others there, but I'll leave this with you for after. Next slide, please. This is a quote about the guide dog ad, which came from our roundtable participant there. The South African Guide Dog Association put a top door, outstandingly filmed advert for guide dogs, music, narration, but not about a word about guide dogs until the very end. And so the advert was utterly inaccessible to the blind. Either you have bespoke audio description or you narrate it cleverly enough so that you don't need audio description, but you can still get the ad from an audio point of view. I suspect 99.999% of ads and branding are in fact utterly inaccessible to the blind without some form of description. Please take this quote away and think about the next communication you're designing. Just put your eyes away or close your screen down and listen to your ad, listen to your communication, and think about who might not understand who you are and why you're selling this when you don't have the visuals to go with it. Next slide, please. Another one from the India Roundtable. This is making sure quality is suitable as well. An alternative is not accessible if it's not quality. This is one about sign language interpreting, and we've heard this in South Africa, of course, as well. At a very basic level, make sure the communication is actually correct. Doesn't seem a big pocket science thing here, but we do find when people are doing accessibility, they don't necessarily take the same level of care that they do in their other communications. In this case, on the news, the interpreter was there on the screen, but the interpreter was not a qualified one. They were interpreting, but I couldn't understand the signs of the interpreter. That's not very useful. Next slide, please. This one from Australia, a wheelchair user who said there was a Tough Mudder advert, and it included a wheelchair user in the advert, not in the middle as a focal point, but just quite naturally amongst a group of friends. However, the advert was outside a gym that was benefiting from the ad, and the gym was not wheelchair accessible. Oh, I didn't even think that I could do that as a wheelchair user. It was inspiring for me. It wasn't obvious. It was subtle, and I like that. I like that. That's the way it should be. I think authentic representation should be subtle. I had to double look because they were represented normally, right in the middle on a silver platter. I'm like, wait, that's a wheelchair user. So that we do live within context of other people, able-bodied, not, people without disabilities, people with disabilities, and that just as part of a scene. Next slide, please. Inclusion without accessibility is nothing. Very succinctly point from one of our roundtable participants in Australia. And from Kenya, the adverts and marketing weren't accessible. I could buy from your business. This is specifically beneficial to local Kenyan companies rather than buying from large global companies who have better accessibility. If you want to sell, improve your accessibility. This person was having to buy from large global companies because that's where they could perceive. I think it's important for companies to appreciate persons with disabilities are people who are consumers of these advertisements of the content first. Secondly, they're consumers of products that they're advertising. I'm going to access the global content in contrast to Kenyan local adverts. This goes to our kind of final point we'll get to later. Thank you. Next slide. Disability representation in terms of sufficiency. On one side, you've got very insufficient or stigmatised, very tokenistic. On the other side, sufficient, consistent, just normalised in a range of different roles, from very central to the narrative to just incidental, as we heard. Some of the examples, the Western gaze, we heard this particularly from countries in Africa and in Latin America that that white, Western privileged perspective, even within disability and within representation, was felt in those regions. Pity or inspirational porn. Inspirational porn comes from the gorgeous fella from Australia as a term. It is when we over sensationalize disability for people who are not disabled. So it's using disability, but not for the disability community, but for non-disabled. And jam jar representation, Caroline's expression that I keep using, once for show and done, and just kind of, oh, we've got one of them, tick, bingo card. Next, can we get someone who looks racially diverse? And can we make sure we've got someone who looks non-binary? Tick, 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 yay, we're there. And can you all thank us for having done that, because we did it once. We're so good. Next along, visible and non-visible disability representation, that it's easy to get to the easier to represent. It's harder to get to the harder to represent. There are ways, and again, just ask people, they'll tell you how. And actually people will recognise people with needs such as themselves in very subtle ways. Not everyone needs to. It's just showing to those communities that we actually have people, with your needs here, and you can see that. And included, not incorporated, and people being visible but not really incorporated in the power of that visibility means that they're there, but actually those narratives are not going to be that true. They're not truly incorporated, or that you've got disability over here in this kind of little corner. Oh, and now we're back to our main show, and the main show is over here. That's included, but not incorporated. On the really positive end, you've got people, organisations like Channel 4's Code of Portrayal, that they're not just leaders, but sharing that leadership so that we can all benefit from it. It's very short Code of Portrayal. It's very specific, useful and practical guideline. I can't recommend it highly enough to you. Their journey got them there. They talk, when they're talking about it, about their failures along the way, having turned up with intent, with integrity, across from London 2012 right through to Tokyo, and still going. This journey is never over, but they talk about how they initially put people in front of the camera, and they realized until they put people behind the camera as well, and in the decisions, power making decisions, they weren't actually really representing. Next slide, please. Some of the stats in disability representation: 84% of our respondents didn't feel that advertising represented them sufficiently. This is enormous. This is a huge market, and the majority of them very loudly are saying, we don't feel seen. Here is an opportunity. Anything that's a big negative is such a great opportunity. I'm an optimist, if nothing else. And actually, this is a space, as I was mentioning, we can move quite fast. It's not something where we need to move cement to be able to move it. The other one is the benefit of this. So if that's the negative, here's the positive. 60% of respondents would change their behaviours if communication consistently represented disability more appropriately. There are not many things where you'd get a community where 60% would change their behaviours. So this is a very high number. This is something where I will change my loyalty. We also asked them about a promotion to others. So, and that was, I think, 56%, and same with embedding their purchasing preferences. So across all these things that drive value and massive customer value, there is huge consistency in terms of behavioural change. Next slide, please. So from Australia, our roundtable, an Australian Aboriginal female with multiple co-occurring needs told us that as a completely normal person for whom disability is a characteristic but doesn't define my personality, just a part of me. I think reducing stigma is the most important thing. We're not starting from a neutral base here. And just, sorry, I'm bringing my voice in the middle. But we are starting from a stigmatised base. I sometimes feel embarrassed, and this is heightened when people with similar disabilities are highlighted as different. To counteract this, I think it's important to represent disabilities as normal and part of every community. It's just part of humanity. Next slide, please. From our UK community, we had, in a way that says disability representation should be in a way that says we see you, we respect you, we've thought about you, and we won't treat you differently. I feel that I've used the word casually a lot during this survey. So I'll add that word to, I'd like to be represented in communications casually, subtle, thoughtful things that decrease stigma and increase accessibility. I don't want a big song and dance about it. I want disabled to be normal. It is normal to those lives of us, people with disability. This is normal, just part of how humans live humanly. Thank you. Next slide. This one from a lovely friend of mine who's short of stature and a British Asian lady who said, I'm 36, I've only seen 5 disabled people of colour on my screen. I know the difference it would have made to me seeing accurate portrayal of disability stories, intersectional stories. By the way, there's so much more rich and interesting to watch. And from a neurodivergent individual in Kenya, he said, you only see parents of autistic kids. You don't get anything from the autistic adults. Where are they? I've never seen a Black autistic woman speaking up and just sharing her own lived experience. 2 parts of that, both the individual, not the parent, but also we heard from South Africa as well that white and autistic often go together, and the Black autistic experience is underheard. Next one, please. And the last one, authentic narratives and portrayal. This one is just so critical, from very ableist narratives that the lazy, harmful tropes we've talked about of needy, a foil for some hero to save, the pity, the villain, the inspirational porn, all these kind of ways in which disability has been used and abused in the past as a poor narrative, and not a genuine narrative, a narrative that is actually for non-disabled people and about disabled people, but not for them. And people are not involved in the creative process at all at the kind of negative point. In the middle point, interestingly, superhero and pedestal narratives, we saw that there's a maturity that organizations, countries can start with this very kind of charity model, pity model of disability. They quite often then go to the other extreme, which is a superhero, the amazing kind of Paralympian. In the UK, US, and probably Australia, it's like, oh God, don't go there, inspirational porn. Actually, we heard in places like India, oh, thank God, it's not a pity narrative. We don't mind this narrative because it's challenging it. So we've actually got to put our own kind of cultural bias across this and say, hang on, this does have a place on the journey to a more normalised narrative. So this was an interesting one for us to challenge ourselves, actually. And disabled people having limited input in this middle stage, but beginning to be able to be seen in a broader range of roles. And on the other side, a really normalised, rounded human lived experience, contextually relevant. So relevant to the context of the communications, brand relevant, experience aligned, and this idea of Easter eggs, adding in little treats for people who don't even know. This is where non-visible disability can really come in, because people recognise themselves, and it doesn't matter that not everyone does. That's fine. On the negative, very sadly, the World Advertising Organisation has said 1 in 7 people, this is last year, said they're going to leave the advertising industry on account of a lack of diversity and inclusion. That was 1 in 4 disabled individuals working in the advertising industry today. If we don't get this right now, we're going to make this worse, because people are leaving the industry because they're not feeling that they belong and are included there. In India, we found that superhero narrative I spoke to, and on the very positive side, Bus Stop Films, an Australian organisation that has just done wonderful work in terms of the toolkit around filmmaking with people with disabilities. The Cadbury Fingers Sign With Me ad and campaign, actually we worked on that 2 years ago, where it wasn't just an advert that was created from, by and with people who are sign language users in the UK, and particularly young sign language users. But it used reverse empathy, where the experience they have of limited, just getting some of the communication, we actually used the advert to showcase that to others and gave people an option to learn skills. And then L'Oreal HAPTA, just end-to-end engaging with community, from advertising and marketing to product design, right throughout, to make that a really beautiful experience end-to-end. Next slide, please. In terms of authentic portrayal, only 10% of respondents felt that their own disability was portrayed authentically. So the majority of people, by a very, very high amount, feel unseen. Interestingly, 12% across all disabilities, and this is across all disability categories. People said, my disability is a little bit worse than everyone else. That's because we understand our own disability better, so it just shows that. 85% of respondents said social attitudes towards disability would improve if the media portrayed disability more fairly and accurately. This is the power of disability representation. We don't just change the experience in the moment, we change social attitudes and societies. Next slide, please. I won't read all these quotes, but just the normalising human difference. So like a normal human being, like a normal person, not patronised, not stylised as a superhero. That was from someone in Germany. In the US, someone said, it's time to see disabled people playing roles of disabled characters in dramas, and time to the news to stop casting disability stories as inspirational or amazing. We need content that shows people with disabilities getting on with day-to-day living, working, playing, raising families, etc. Next slide, please. From Japan, interestingly, listening differently in different cultures. That's why I put this quote in. This is very quiet Japanese voice. This is very loud in that culture. When they're considering how to create, I think people with disabilities can be included in the thought process in creation of the concept. People don't challenge in Japan. This is a loud voice. In the US, you might hear, we must, we should. This is the same energy. It just comes differently wrapped in different cultures. Next slide, please. So some Australian specific perspectives. I'll just very quickly touch on these. Next slide, please. This is just a couple of things to be curious about. Firstly, Australia feels better portrayed than the rest of the world. Only Japan felt better portrayed than Australia. So 9% in news and current affairs globally, 20% in Australia felt they were always or often accurately portrayed. TV and film, 11% to 22% in Australia, 11% globally, 22% Australia, 8% in advertising to 13% globally, 9% brand and communications, 20% Australia. So in all of these, Australia felt half to double represented relative to global. That's interesting. Something's going right here. Next slide, please. However, people are not going to change their behaviours on the basis of change. There's a lower change sensitivity to greater representation. I don't understand why this is. I just put it out there and say, ask the community here in Australia to understand this. Still quite a high change propensity, but it is lower than globally. So news and current affair are more likely to watch more, from 43% globally to 40% in Australia. TV and film, 44% globally, 38% Australia. Advertising, more likely to buy products and services, 54% to 43% in Australia. Brand communications, more likely to purchase from these brands, 56% to 48%. So just a couple of curious things. I won't go to the next slide, just keep jumping over because that just says, so what? Last one, next one, please. This is another time to wake up for those who are busy having their cup of coffee or trying to multitask if you're online. What can we do about this? Firstly, disability representation and brand experience need to move together. If you increase your brand experience and create beautifully inclusive and accessible products where people are welcome and have a sense of belonging in your brand, but you forget to tell people about them, how will they find you? Equally, if you create this beautiful front door with amazing representation and then exclude people in the product or service experience, that's going to feel pretty inauthentic. As one improves, the other has to kind of keep track. You can never be exactly aligned. That's just unrealistic. But just recognizing these two things have to move together. Secondly, empathy. Deepen your understanding of disability. This is an incredibly diverse community, but the understanding is quite easy to reach to when you, as I say, when you start engaging with individuals. So engage and empower experts by experience throughout the creative process, not just in front of the camera, not just in the representation, but in your teams, in your staff, in the creative process, in your procurement, in the way you ask your agencies to work with you and you brief them in what you're looking for and expecting. internal and attention and intention. So build that, knowing that better representation will increase customer loyalty, sales and brand accuracy. I've given you some numbers here today. Take them away and showcase them to the leadership in your organisation, or just take them and share them with your team. So this will improve your bottom line, that simply. There's some numbers here to help you with that. Take that and build the attention and intention and organisation needs to support that.
My laptop just died. I'm so sorry.
Oh.
Yes.
This is actually a very important one. It's recognising that standing still, you are falling backwards. One of the things we asked in the research is, how do you feel we've gone in the last 5 years to now? Positive, negative, neutral. How do you feel we're going? Actually, very positively, people felt that things had moved forward significantly in the last 5 years, and they expect that to continue. The thing about that for brands is it means expectations are changing, and if you are standing still, you are falling backwards. So the last point is, don't stand still, move forward with courage, move forward with agency, engage with the community, just enjoy the diversity of the community. You can't tell every story at once, one at a time, one layer at a time, relevant and respectful to your brand, in line with the community that you're there to represent. And that's slightly different for every brand. Thank you.
There's some food for thought for all of us to really unpack. And I'm going to amend something that Christine said there, because she said you can take this back to your leadership or your team. No, you have to take it to your leadership. That's who you hear about, and the team, exactly. So I just want to iterate for those in the room that this is kind of the 1 hour mark, and we're jumping into Hayley now, who's going to present some of the collaboration and Australian insights for about 10 minutes. But of course, you're more than welcome as you need to sit and stand, move around. There's food at the back of the table. We just ask you to do that respectfully. So I'll hand over to Hayley now.
There we go. My microphone is now on. I'm Hayley. I'm the Customer and Employee Experience Lead at Australian Disability Network. I'm going to give a visual description, and the reason I'm going to is because I'm a person with non-visible disability. And so I'm wearing my sunflower lanyard to show that people may not see it because there's a table in front of me, but whenever I am representing myself, I have my weighted blanket with me to make me feel comfortable. It's something for me to look after me. It's not for other people to use as marketing, and that's something that I choose to do. And that choice is really important for people. Before I talk about anything, I love my role. Every day I get to take what I learn from people with disability and then summarize that and then share it with business that leads to action. So, and gosh, I'm getting a bit teary now. I want to say thank you to every person with disability who is involved in this project. So if we can all do a quick clap for everyone. I am so grateful to people who trust me and who share really openly, so thank you. And I do also acknowledge country, and I acknowledge that there were Indigenous Australians who were involved in this project. So I also recognise you. Thank you. We've heard you as well. And so, as Christine highlighted, media shapes public opinion. And so what happens when people are portrayed as objects of pity? We start to, well, I can say I've had people think that of me and we lose hope. Barriers also exist as well for people. So when people are seen as just objects of need rather than being able to do anything, it's going to lead to barriers for people in employment, access to housing, education. So I'm just going to leave it with everyone that media, the way we communicate, the messages we share, shapes public opinion, and that affects people's lives. And so the lives that we can affect in Australia So to give you some stats, 1 in 6 people have disability. That's 18% of our population. As we age, at the age of 60, 1 in 3 of us are likely to experience disability. 45% of Australians will experience a mental health condition at any time in their lives. And also we need to acknowledge that people who have an intersectional identity are also at a higher rate of experiencing disability. So the messages we share impact that many people in their daily lives, not just because it's a TV show, but the people who are in employment, recruitment, who've seen these TV shows that show people of pity, that can influence their behaviours. So our beliefs can affect, are created from the media. It affects our attitudes, which can affect our behaviours and our actions as well. So I just want to say this is why it's important. And so what we did, and I know that my lovely colleague Kate Havas is online as well, so I just want to acknowledge Kate for her support on the project as well. We supported the project in connecting with Australians in a way that was culturally and accessibly appropriate. So I love being a facilitator. So we helped to adapt the language so that it was suitable for our context. We also did a screener survey to make sure that we were getting representation across different accessibility requirements. When it came to doing the survey, we recognised that there's a digital divide where not all people have access to online. So the lovely Kate was available and actually supported people in a way that worked for them to be able to share their responses with us. When we recruited for the focus group, I took the time. If anyone had any questions, they were able to talk to me. We connected with some great advocates, and we were really targeted in the way that we recruited, because we didn't just want people with disability who aren't in leadership positions. So we had people working in advertising, actually working in film and media as well, and also representing cultural perspectives as well. And then also importantly, which often doesn't happen, is we closed the loop. And so we actually connected back in with people and shared an update and shared the report. And I made an offer that if anyone did want to connect in with the team, that they were welcome to. And if anyone's online today and was involved and they want to connect, my contact details will be shared somewhere. I'm very happy for you to connect that way. And Christine was talking about Australia as being an outlier, and I don't really know what makes us different, but there are some things that were happening at the time. So we started recruiting for the project. It was about a month after the report for the Disability Royal Commission had been released. So there was a lot of conversation that was happening that was focused on empowerment of people with disability. We've also got some great advocacy organisations that are already working in the inclusive representation area. At the time, the Shift 20 initiative had just been launched. There's also the Attitude Foundation, Inclusively Made, and then a great organisation called Best Stop Films, who not only advocate, but also give people with disability opportunities to work in media as well. So I can't really go too much more into detail with that, but something that really stood true on that is that, yes, we might be doing good, but there's more that we can do. So I'm going to share some insights on what we notice in the work that we do. And so in our Access and Inclusion Index, which is a benchmarking tool to look at your overall accessibility and inclusion, we have a question that asks organisations to show and give evidence of how they represent people with disability in their media, communications, advertising. And thanks to the lovely Rosie Lane, we have some stats. So in 2021, only 19% of organisations who are involved regularly represented people with disability in their external and internal comms. And we're not just talking about disability specific, we're talking about mainstream communications. In 2022, I don't know what happened, it was only 18%. But in 2023, that did go up to 25%. And I'm hoping that that will continue to grow, but there's still a lot more that we can do. And so with business communications, in my work, I speak to a lot of people with disability. And often it comes up time and again, the lack of accessible formats. And actually what I hear from people is that by the time the accessible version is available, because it wasn't planned at the beginning, the information is out of date. And so what does that mean? That means that people don't have equity then, because if you've got special promotions, people with disability aren't going to know about them. And is that really fair? So with the news in Australia, and it's great that we do have reporters who have disability, but I did a search before today and just did a Google search of disability news in Australia. I only saw 2 news media agencies who regularly report on disability. It was mostly focused on the National Disability Insurance Scheme. The other thing I also noticed was that the language of the headlines was changing, that was more in line with the social model of disability. So it would focus on the barrier in the environment or society rather than the barrier of the person. But unfortunately, what I have noticed is that the headline is social model. And then it starts with the body of the text, the devastating experience of this person, etc., and actually starts to go into that pity language. I've also noticed a bit of a difference when advocates in peak organisations are interviewed compared to people in community. There's a big difference there. And I think because media outlets know that they can't use that language when speaking about peak representatives. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention about is that Creative Australia did research in 2017, and they found that people with disability working in the arts, so actors, etc., are paid half of what creatives without disability are paid. So how can we expect people with disability to be creatives if they're not paid that amount? And then lastly, the other thing I'll mention is that we do get inquiries from producers at times, but it's only for disability specific programs. Why, or I'm not going to say why aren't they, because we need to build this conversation, but build it into your mainstream. Like it's not just disability specific. People with disability live everyday lives, so why isn't it represented in all the media that we do? So yeah, thank you.
Amber again, thank you so much, Hayley, for putting that layer of the Australian perspective of how we're partnering and what we were busy doing over here, but also some really interesting statistics as well of what we've been finding and hearing from our members. And there was an audible sound in this room as soon as you were talking about alternate formats and just being expired, the information by the time often it's available for consumers. So that seems like it was very much heard from everyone here. We do have some, excuse me, I have the microphone and the power, unfortunately, for everyone else. So I'm doing a little shuffle in the agenda. I'm going to shorten networking time just so that we can do a bit more Q&A, because I know a lot of people will love to have and be brought into the conversation here. And those online, just a reminder that you can use the Q&A function and pop your questions in there. And in the room, of course, pop up your hand and we'll bring you a microphone. And I might ask, yep, I've already got some runners at the front for this, and we'll perhaps use, hey, actually, we need 2 at the front. Do we have another one? Maybe we'll figure that out. But one thing I wanted to kick off with, and I acknowledge as well, because I've done that shuffle. If you need to, if you were going to scamper off and run to work as well, please feel free to do that. That's not rude. We are human beings with other lives. But kicking us off, I just wanted to finish the conversation with you, Hayley, for a call to action. Actually, is there something in terms of what could organisations do?
Thank you so much. And yeah, I've been mulling over this week. I was like, how can I present what can be quite scary for people and a lot to think about? So I came up with yesterday, lights, camera, action. And so lights, where are you bringing people to work with to represent? So what is the environment like? Lights, temperature, even people coming too close, touching you, can be a barrier for people with disability. How long are the days are you having breaks for people? So lighting, think about your environment. So then camera, focus on the person, not the disability. Ask people what they need, not just during, but also in that recruitment promotion process. Ask a question, do you have any accessibility requirements? But the important question to ask is, how would you like to be represented? So me, I have experienced trauma in my life and have been offered before to be on TV, but I did not want people to have, you know, that really sad music that comes on?
Yeah.
I don't want that. And so ask the person how they want to be represented, or even connect with peak organisations. And then action. So we need policies and processes to be able to do what we do. So look at your procurement. If you're working with third parties, so your camera people, etc., are they disability confident? Do they know what to do? Are your consent forms in accessible language so people can make informed decisions on being involved, and how their story and image is going to be used as well is really important. And then also your pay. Are you paying people for their expertise and time as well?
Amber again. Well, the chat online is very quiet, so please feel free. You're in a very safe space. You're welcome to pop in some questions. We're waiting for you, but we'll start at the front. Briar, over to you.
Thank you so much. Is this? Yep. Briar here. I love research. I was a client director at one of those 7 global research agencies that you were mentioning, and that's reflected in our accessibility and inclusion plan. So 2 of the 12 commitments in there are around listening to lived experience, 1 for employees, 1 for customers, community and partners, just to really hammer that home. One of the challenges that I would really appreciate the panel's thoughts on is what I can only describe as like segregated research, because the big research agencies that we use to do the trackers, to do the product development, all of that stuff, don't have the ability yet to include people with disability. You then end up with 2 pieces of research, and how can we actually get it to be one? Because thinking from the perspective of the decision makers whose hearts and minds we are winning, but they don't know how to do this, and then we make it harder by giving them segregated research reports. Do you have any thoughts on where that's going, how we can help them, how we can sort of bring that together?
Such an important question. Thank you. I'll start on this one and then pass on. But mainstream research today does leave very big exclusion holes, even when there's great intent. And the reason is those practices, those tools, you know, whether it's survey tools, whether it's the way panels are created, which means we end up needing a second layer if you're wanting to listen to your broad range of either customers or employees, etc. The way I would love to see the research sector change, and actually in my spare time as a volunteer, I work with the Market Research Society's Unlimited group, which is a disability inclusive representation, to try and uplift the skills across the research sector so there's less gap. The reality is there's gap today. That means there's two ways of dealing with it. One is when you're procuring research, being very explicit, who does and who doesn't this include? When you're providing research, be very explicit, who does and who doesn't this include? There's always a gap. We have a gap here. We had 1,000 people representing 1.3 billion people. A little bit of a gap. However, if we're very honest about, we've worked, that's why I always share the demographics, we've worked really hard to try and get good representation. We won't get everyone. So that allows the next layer of research to do more of what you've missed and to keep layering learning, because we never learn in one line. We have to learn in layers. Secondly, it means you need experts, because at the moment, the practices are not going to reach disabled people in an equivalent way. So if you're saying, and this is still taking, you're trying to understand a environment, a government service or a physical product or a product that you're providing, you might need to have a specialist research agency fill the gap. We sometimes work with research agencies to do that, so that the client buys one set of research, they've got two research agencies supporting it, and there's one report. It means that I come from a design and innovation background, by the way, I didn't mention. Research is later in life where I got to, because I realised if I went upstream a bit, there was more fun and more, it was a joy. We're very, very conscious of trying to make it easier to inform better decisions, and to do that giving one set of insights that are not contradictory, but recognise contradictions across the insights and have already worked through those in a useful way. So trying to get research agencies to work together, whether they're doing it already naturally or whether you actually commission it and then bring it together. Just as an example of that, when COVID hit in the UK, the Test and Trace app was launched. We worked alongside Fluent, who are the mainstream research agency. We did all the disability and age inclusive research and mental health research. It was a very, very rapid fire project. Every month we were running research. We didn't even know what we were running research on until 2 weeks before it. We had to work as one team. We had a beautiful design agency who were listening. We had an amazing research partner in Fluent who we co-created the research with, design it together, run it separately, bring it back together, one set of insights, one outcome. You can do it really well. So it's not hard to do. It just takes conscious recognizing who's in the room, who's not, who's got the skills, who doesn't, and not trying to unpick everything in one layer. Just patiently impatient. I'm trying to learn how to do this as a human being patiently impatient, and just constantly progress over perfection, not letting the fear of this large differentiated humanity get in the way of trying to understand what's relevant. One other last point, if you're going to choose, do I do disability inclusive research or do I do mainstream research? Well, isn't that the 80%? That's the 20%. Interesting trick. When you're engaging with people with disabilities, they interestingly have all their other parts of themselves. So when you start at the edge, you get the centre for free. So if you're only going to listen to a small number of people, start with people with marginalised experiences, because you get a much broader range of experiences when you do that. It's just more efficient research.
Can I add to that, because I love that. We often talk about the extremes. So soft front and hard back. We don't need to make enemies out of people, but we actually need to call in standards and call out some serious truths. There is one thing worse than being discriminated or bullied, and it's being invisible. It is just not okay anymore. And I'm going to do something that is important, and I keep saying I will meet you, McKinsey, in the corner. McKinsey would release what we would know as the most influential diversity and equity and inclusion index in the world. In 2018, disability did not appear in it. I called them and said why. 2020, they were releasing their next one in the World Economic Forum, and disability did not appear again. And the reason they say that is because disability in their mind has no materiality to business. So if disability does not have materiality to business, it ain't going to turn up in a cohort that's valuable for research. So the one thing that I want to add on in a way that we can work with the valuable 500 is we do want them to report on disability performance on 5 harmonized metrics in their annual reports. Because if we're going to prove materiality of disability to business, it is the market that needs to do that. And when you start reporting on performance and getting metrics into investor indexes like Moody's, then they're going to be interested in what we have to say. So at the same level of what we're doing deeply in research, there is an imperative at the top of all of our organizations to prove this materiality so that we will seek the information. And that's when we get strong back. We can smile, but we've got strong backs too.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just
You
realised I
add?
wanted
Yep.
to add one more thing, which I didn't add before, which is today, people with disabilities are invited to have their voices heard when it's a social issue, when it's a disability specific issue, when it's about NDIS, just like in the media and marketing, when it's about disability. Why are we not being heard when it's about fashion, when it's about going to a movie, when it's about the enjoyment of travel, when it's about getting your audit services done, when it's about living our lives? Disabled people live lives that have all sorts of other things not to do with the NDIS. God love the NDIS. So why are we not being represented either in research or in representation outside of these very specific social spaces? I challenge the market back to the soft front, hard back. Market research and design research needs to include people with disabilities by practice.
Yeah, it's not discretionary.
It's not social research we're talking about. It's consumer, market, industry. Nationally representative research today does not include disability as a requirement to be able to say it's NatRep. Oh, oops. It's the same thing as the McKinsey one. So all research needs to either include or explicitly say we excluded so that someone else can come in and include.
Amber here, well said. Online is going off now, just by the way.
Yeah, I can ask it. It's fine.
How do we give marketers better access to inclusive creative production?
Okay, well, I mean, first of all, ask for inclusive creative production is the most important thing. Look, one of the most exciting things that I think is coming is that when we're talking about representation, we're not just talking in front of the camera, but we're talking behind the camera as well, right? So how are we seeing that creative mindset and creative talent, disabled talent in the production, because actually sitting on the board of Sky, which I do, one of the things that they're working on is not just for the representation and the content in front of the camera, but how are we getting the skills behind it? And one of the most powerful roles is the producers, right? So how do we do that? How do we educate and make accessible the universities, the training schools that welcome and make accessible the courses for people with disabilities? And it is a real chicken and egg, right, isn't it? So I think one of the things that we can all do in this room, because I love a call to action, the best thing is just to ask the question all the time, where is it? Being curious. And I also believe, right back to what Christine has said, we need to put our businesses, I think it was you that mentioned it, Hayley, about the supply chain. There's real power in supply chains and tendering processes. So if we can get tendering processes and people coming in for request to tender to prove that they have an inclusive production team or inclusive mindset, that is what actually starts the triggering of it. But never underestimate the power of when you're asking somebody for a request to tender, to insist upon you want to have evidence to prove that you have inclusive talent in your offering. And I think that is a way that we change it. And I think it is the way we'll change it around research as well.
Absolutely. We need the decision of how portrayal is portrayed needs to be done by people with the knowledge. And that requires recruitment. That also requires accessible environments. And in fact, I had a quote previously from a shorter stature British Asian lady who does TV film in the UK and quite regularly goes into inaccessible environments for her. They're not physically accessible. And Hayley was talking about psychologically accessible, socially accessible, or auditorily accessible is also important. So not just bringing people in, but giving them environments in which they can thrive and be successful.
Amazing. Amber again. Hayley, this one came for you. How can we represent people with non-visible disability in marketing?
Thank you so much for that question. And Christine did cover it, but the nuance is that people may not overtly know that we have disability, but certainly people with lived experience will know that. And quite funny that a colleague recently was picked up my lived experience, even though I don't show it often. But that was something that was unique to both of us. So that definitely is something that it's for representation for people seeing themselves in that media. And I think it also comes back again to how do we include all disability regardless. Check in with the person, and I'm going to keep doing my lights, camera, action. So thinking about the environment that you're working in and the environment that you're bringing people into, focusing on the person and asking them how they're represented. And gosh, if any Hollywood directors do come to me after this and want me in a film, please don't play any sad music when I'm shown. But then also your policies and processes are really important. But when you're looking at those policies and processes, making sure that there's inclusive design within them. So actually people with disability are having input into how you do the work with people. Our guiding principles at OSDN, if you haven't heard them before, is ask the person, don't assume, and everyone is unique. So we need to check in with people in the way that we're working with them and embedding that in our policies and processes. But of course, if anyone has any more questions, please feel free to get in contact with us.
Actually, that is, can I just say a really, really good point, Hayley? Anybody who's listening and has questions, OSDN, an organisation like this, that's where you need to go when you don't know, right? So these are organizations, we're sitting in a consultancy and professional services. When you have organizations like this on the ground, go out and seek and be part of this extraordinary pool of knowledge. And one of the things when we talk with the Valuable 500 is look in your region to find your version of OSDN. But you're not expected to know all of this in business. These are the people on the ground with lived experience and have been working with business for a long time. So cannot encourage more partnerships like this, because I think that expedites the change. So anybody who doesn't know OSDN, get to know OSDN, because honestly, because you're not recreating the wheel and you learn from each other. And I think one of the most important things that we can do is learn from each other, right? And that just accelerates the change that we want to see.
I was just going to bring a little bit to life that non-visible disability. And we heard when we were talking in the US a story about Coda. Coda, the film, Children of Deaf Adults, great film, there at the Oscars, people with disabilities and so on. But just the little touches. So the producer is not deaf, but brought in co-producers who were deaf to help inform throughout that film. And just a tiny little snippet of a story that shows the care that means that when someone who's a sign language user watches that film, they go, I was there. They saw me. When they were setting up the living room of the home of the key characters, they had the classic living room and the sofas looking at the TV and the doors over there. The sign language person, producer came in and went, we need to be looking at the door. We don't look at the TV, we look at each other. Our eyes are critically important to communication. We've only got one set of eyes. We don't waste it looking at a blank TV. These are the little subtle things that if you're not a sign language user, you're not expected to know. But the community can very quickly go, oh, that's not a sign language using house. So those little subtle things, when you've got the humility, and I often, anyone who's heard me speak, I often talk about these two things of humility and audacity. It actually comes from Jacqueline Novogratz, a beautiful quote of hers from Acumen. Real innovation happens when you have these two things together, working in harmony. You need the humility to know you don't know, but the audacity to still want to get there. And that humility of knowing you don't know and then partnering and finding whether it's the expert organizational partners or the individual partners with that knowledge to be able to inform it and turn that living room around.
Thanks, Christine. We are ridiculously out of time, but I'm giving Nerida the last word here. Let's have one last question and a very succinct answer, and then we'll close.
Thank you very much, Amber. And my name's Nerida Weller, and yes, I'm speaking from two experiences here. One is recent winner of the Disability Employee Network of the Year, working for a professional services company, an engineering company, which is a global company, member of Valuable 500, and yes, chipping away at the communications teams to improve our representation. But I'm also speaking as someone who 20 years ago sat in a room with two disabled people and a film director and went, how can we create a fully accessible, authentically represented film festival? There is nothing like this that exists in the world. We have to find filmmakers with disabilities. We have to find an accessible venue. No one wants to caption their films at that point in time because that destroys the aesthetic of the film. No one was audio describing their film. So all I can say is that we had that humility and audacity. I think we just went, we are going to do this. We are going to smash through these barriers. We had to find a partner in the UK to do all the audio description of all the films. We had to set up a committee of disabled people to come and view the films and vet them for delightful to dastardly. I absolutely love that. There are just so many touch points with everything that you've said today. And so I think it's just amazing for anyone out there who is working in this area. You've got an incredible amount of resources that are available to you today that weren't available, 20 years ago. So it is great to see the progress. It's also a little bit sad to see, obviously, some of the same issues still prevailing. And the other thing, putting back on my network hat, help is closer than you think if you activate the people in your organisation. I mean, we know, yes, 1 in 5 people have a disability, but that I always say to my company, that means 1 in 3 households. So everyone's got some kind of experience and you just need to activate it. You need to go out and ask about it and you need to give people that voice and you'll find that solutions are closer to home than you think. Thank you.
Thanks, Nerida. Very nice. Final comments, team? Carolyn?
Go check out Real Abilities or EEL Abilities in the US because thank God things have changed. So yes, that's number 1. I just think this is all of our responsibility. We are all accountable for making this change. And I often say joining the dots. So whether you're the CEO, the managing director, you lead an ERG group, you're somebody who loves watching good content, you're a consumer, be radically curious all the time. You can never offend by intentionally asking and just ask for what's missing.
Radically curious. Perfect. I will add to that courage. You were talking about that courage to just lean in and go, don't quite know how to do all of this, but let's give it a go. And knowing that going some direction towards that ambition and that audacious goal is okay, and being patiently impatient, keep that impatience, keep it going, find partners, collaborate and find community. And we've heard lots of different ways you can find community. I, like Hayley, am incredibly privileged to have reached a community and to have the trust and confidence of people in our community. And in this case, 1,056 individuals in the community who have shared their experiences with us so that we can share this value with you today. We are simply the pipeline. We're the knowledge. you can also be pipelines in your own way to your communities. One comment that Emily Landau actually made via Tiffany Yu in the US, which I thought was also really helpful, was that other side. To invite and to welcome here today everyone across the disability community, whether that's your own individual experience, whether that's because you've got a household with someone with lived experience, but to bring your experiences to this as well, because you need to be heard for us to be able to represent people well. Not everyone will want to be heard all of the time. Not everyone will want to be engaged all the time. But Emily's comment was, if we want the world to be accessible to the disability community, then let's make our ideas and experiences surrounding disability more accessible to the world. And that's on all of us to do, not in the ways that are relevant and useful to you, in ways that are fair and respectful, but we all need to be heard, and that means people need to share as well. And I recognise that that's two sides. We need to make safe, comfortable, fair, and genuinely useful spaces for that to happen. And actually, just one thing, because of your comment about where have we been and where are we now, let's also look forward to where we're going. This is getting easier. Technology has come in, and if you think about being able to get, good content, good captioning, the ability to turn captions on and off as you wish, the ability to turn sign language on and off, which is coming as you wish, the ability to have AI create the first audio description and first captioning that you can then just correct, and it's 80% of the way there. The cost of this is going down and is going to go down further. So this is getting easier and easier to do, and that is a joy for us all.
Lovely, thank you so much, Hayley speaking. And I'm going to end with listen to us and include us. We need to be in mainstream media. And at Australian Disability Network, I'm going to continue to listen to community. And we're going to continue, and I'm looking at the lovely Rosie Lane, our Access and Inclusion lead. We're going to continue to monitor the representation of people with disability within our membership as well. But yeah, listen to us, include us, please.
A huge thank you to our panel, please, today.